Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a place where nothing could touch you? Where evil can't reach you? Psalm 91 reveals this secret. God not only promises to protect you, but He places you in His hiding place, a safe space that goes far beyond the physical. If you're looking for peace in the middle of life's storms, this video is for you. At the heart of the Bible, we find Psalm 91, one of the most revered songs of trust and protection. With words that transcend time, this psalm makes us reflect, where is our refuge when life's storms hit? The psalmist shows us a God who not only sees but intervenes. He is the one who dwells in the secret place of the Most High, and invites us to live there too, under His powerful shadow. Imagine living with that kind of security, the certainty that God is always present in the chaos. Psalm 91 has been a spiritual anchor for generations, from ancient times to today. In moments of trouble, when everything around seems uncertain, we're reminded that there is a safe place. And what if, even now, you could feel that protection? How would that change the way you live? Throughout history, kings, prophets, and everyday people have sought this refuge. The power of this psalm lies in its simplicity. It doesn't promise a life without struggles, but it guarantees that in the midst of them, God is there. And that's the beauty of faith, trusting that no matter what happens, we are covered. How many times have you experienced this truth in your life? Interestingly, some rabbinical scholars, as mentioned in the Midrash, believe Moses wrote this psalm. Picture Moses, after building the tabernacle, composing these words that would echo through the ages. He, who witnessed God's power firsthand, gives us a glimpse of the peace that comes from fully trusting in God. So, the big question is, how can we, today, live in that secret place? What steps can we take to live with this unshakable trust? Psalm 91 isn't just a song from the past, it's a call to action in the present. How will you respond to that invitation? When the psalmist talks about dwelling in the secret place of the Most High, he's inviting us into a deep intimacy with God. This isn't just any refuge, it's the secret place where God's presence surrounds us, an impenetrable shelter. What would it feel like to know that even when everything around you falls apart, you're hidden under the care of the Creator of the universe? This metaphor isn't just about physical safety, it's about mental and spiritual peace too. Resting in the shadow of the Almighty goes beyond just being protected. Imagine the scorching heat of a battle or the stresses of life. In God's shadow, we're relieved and refreshed. This image brings to mind perfect rest, where we find strength that we can't generate on our own. How has it been for you to rest in God, especially during the hardest times? There's something incredibly powerful in knowing that God not only protects us but also strengthens us. He's the fortress that never shakes. Think about the great miracles in the Bible, David being protected from Saul, Daniel in the lion's den, and so many others. Each one found refuge in God, and he acted with power. Isn't that same strength available to us today? These verses from Psalm 91 remind us that God isn't distant, He's present, offering not just a temporary shelter but a place to live. The psalmist's confidence makes us ask ourselves, where are we seeking refuge? In our own strength or in the shadow of the Almighty? It's a question that challenges us every day. Now, think about this. What does it really mean to dwell in God? It's not just a quick visit but a life dedicated to His presence, knowing that He's our rock, unchangeable and always there. How can we live in a way that this truth becomes the foundation of our lives, changing the way we face every storm? In verse 3 of Psalm 91, we're assured that God will rescue us from the traps of the enemy and the deadly plagues. But what does that mean for us today? The traps can be physical, emotional, or spiritual, and they're often invisible to us. Yet God sees them all, and with His power, He steers us away from dangers we don't even notice. How many times have you experienced divine intervention during tough times? When the psalmist talks about deadly plagues, we might think of the major illnesses and crises of our time. But beyond physical diseases, there are also emotional and spiritual plagues, fears, anxieties, and temptations. God's promise is clear: He protects us from these forces that try to destroy us. Think of the biblical miracles, like the deliverance of Israel from the plagues in Egypt. The same God who intervened back then is still working in our lives today. This protection doesn't mean a life without challenges, but it does mean the assurance that God walks with us through them. Look at the example of Job, who faced the enemy's traps and suffered greatly, but was ultimately restored by God. Today, we can trust that even when we don't understand what's happening around us, God is working to protect us. How does this promise impact your trust in God? What fascinates me is that this promise isn't limited to a specific time. God's protection covers all areas of our lives, both the traps we can see and the ones we can't. When you feel surrounded, remember that God is already ahead of you, clearing the path and steering you away from danger. How can we learn to trust more in this invisible protection? This reflection leads us to a deep question: are we aware of God's action in our daily lives? Or do we forget that He's constantly delivering us from traps that could destroy us? It's an invitation to awaken our faith and live with the confidence that, in every situation, God is always there, watching over us. In verse 4 of Psalm 91, the image of God protecting us under His wings is one of the most powerful representations of divine care. This metaphor brings to mind a bird sheltering its young, covering them under its wings to shield them from danger. Isn't it amazing to think that the Creator of the universe offers us this kind of intimate and personal care? How many times have you felt this protection in moments of vulnerability? God's wings aren't just a shelter, they're an expression of His love. That love surrounds us, hides us from danger, and reminds us that we are never alone. Think about how relevant this is in our lives today, in a world filled with uncertainty. When we take refuge under those wings, we find a security that no human power can offer. Have you ever stopped to reflect on the peace that this brings? Beyond the protection of His wings, the psalmist talks about God's truth being an impenetrable shield. This shield isn't just physical, it's spiritual. When God's truth surrounds us, we are protected from lies, doubts, and the enemy's attacks. That truth becomes a shield that gives us strength to face any battle. How does this change the way we approach our daily challenges? Biblical examples like David show us this protection in action. In the midst of his struggles and escapes, David always found refuge in God, trusting that the Lord was his shield. This trust isn't something limited to characters of the past. God is still spreading His wings and offering His shield today. The question is, are we ready to take refuge and trust in this truth? And here's the big revelation: when we trust in this protection, we are freed from fear. We live in a world where fear seems to drive many decisions, but Psalm 91 challenges us to live under God's wings, safe and protected. What about you? Are you ready to hide under those wings and trust in the shield of God's truth? In verses 5 and 6 of Psalm 91, we are called to a trust so deep that it wipes out fear, even in the face of the greatest threats. The psalmist tells us we don't have to fear the terror of the night or the arrow that flies by day. But what does that really mean for our lives? Think of the dark nights we all face, whether it's the fear of the unknown, uncertainties, or the spiritual battles that come when everything seems bleak. What would it be like to live with the certainty that, even in the shadows, we are protected? The courage described in this psalm doesn't come from human strength, but from absolute trust in God. This trust is a shield against both visible and invisible attacks. I'm reminded of stories like Daniel's, who didn't fear the lion's den because he knew God was with him. Today, we face different threats, but the principle is the same: when we trust in God, it doesn't matter what comes against us. What threat are you facing right now, and how can faith change your reaction? The terror of the night could be emotional, mental, or even spiritual. The arrow that flies by day could represent challenges that show up without warning. But the psalm teaches us that with God, we can have peace in the middle of these battles. This peace isn't about the absence of conflict, but about God's presence in the conflict. And it makes me wonder, how often do we seek this peace in the wrong places when all we need is found in our faith? When we look at biblical examples like Joshua, who faced massive enemies and huge challenges, it's clear that his strength came from knowing God was with him. He marched into battle with both courage and peace, knowing that victory was already guaranteed. And that same promise is available to us today. How does this truth impact the way you face your difficulties now? Here's the crucial point: living without fear doesn't mean living without problems, but living with the certainty that God is bigger than any problem. The psalm challenges us to reevaluate our trust. Where are we placing our faith? Are we ready to let go of fear and live with the courage and peace that only God can offer? The answer to that question can radically transform how we approach each day. In verses 7 and 8 of Psalm 91, we find a promise of supernatural victory: 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. What does this really mean? In a world full of battles and challenges, this statement almost seems impossible. But what the psalmist is telling us is that with God, no matter how big the threats are around us, we are preserved. This raises the question: how can we live out this promise in our daily lives? The spiritual victory here goes far beyond physical wins. It's about standing firm even when everything around us falls apart. Think about Joshua's battles as he entered the Promised Land. He faced armies much larger than his, but he won because God was on his side. It's not human strength that brings victory, but God's presence. Have you experienced moments when you knew victory was only possible because God stepped in? This image of thousands falling around us also represents the spiritual struggles we all face: fears, temptations, doubts. All these can surround us, but with God, we are unshaken. The protection and preservation he offers doesn't mean we'll never face problems, but that in the middle of the battle, we'll come out victorious. What are you facing today that needs to be handed over to God so He can fight for you? It's impossible not to think of the biblical stories that illustrate this truth. When David faced Goliath, he seemed to be up against impossible odds. But he knew his trust was in the Lord, not in his own abilities. That's the essence of Psalm 91, our victory doesn't come from ourselves, but from the one who protects us. How can we apply this to the modern battles we face every day? The big revelation here is that when we live this truth, we aren't just preserved, we become witnesses to God's power. Verse 8 tells us that we will see the defeat of the wicked. This reminds us that in the end, it's God who determines the outcome of battles. The real question is, are we trusting Him to win for us, or are we trying to fight on our own? In verses 9 and 10 of Psalm 91, we're reminded of a profound truth again: when we make God our dwelling place, no curse or calamity will come near us. This goes beyond simply seeking God in times of crisis. It's about constantly living in His presence, making Him our daily refuge. How often, in the rush of life, do we forget to stay in that safe place, trying to handle things on our own? Making God our dwelling place means living in Him through every circumstance. It's not an occasional visit, but a life lived in full communion with the Creator. Imagine being in a place where storms can rage around you, but you're at peace because you know you're safe in God's arms. That's the promise He makes us. Have you experienced the difference it makes to face a battle knowing that God is your constant dwelling place? The Bible is full of examples of men and women who made God their refuge. Think of Moses, who lived surrounded by constant danger, but never stopped seeking God's presence. And this protection wasn't just for him, but for the entire people of Israel. What does this teach us about how we should stand in the face of adversity? When we make God our dwelling place, He takes care of us in every area. No curse or calamity can touch the one who lives in God. It doesn't mean we won't face problems, but that God's hand will always be there, guarding and guiding us. The peace that comes from that is priceless. How can we, amidst so many distractions, stay constantly sheltered in this divine care? Maybe it's time to reevaluate where we're seeking our security. And the big question is, are we living as if God is truly our refuge, or are we only seeking Him in moments of desperation? If we can make God our constant shelter, we will experience a protection and peace that goes beyond human understanding. This is God's promise to those who dwell in Him, and it completely changes the way we face the world around us. In verses 11 and 12 of Psalm 91, we're presented with the powerful promise that God sends His angels to protect us in all our ways. This is more than just a simple guarantee of safety, it's the assurance that wherever we are, God has assigned heavenly beings to watch over us. Imagine the magnitude of this divine protection, beings that are invisible, yet always present, sent to guard us. How often do we forget this reality, living as though we're on our own? The Bible gives us extraordinary examples of angelic interventions. Who can forget Daniel in the lion's den, where God sent an angel to shut the mouths of the fierce animals? Or Peter, who was freed from prison by an angel? These stories remind us that even when circumstances seem impossible, God has already provided a heavenly army in our favor. Have you ever wondered how many times angels have intervened in your life without you even knowing it? The fact that these angels protect us in all our ways is something we should take seriously. No matter where we are, at home, at work, traveling, angels are there, sent by God to make sure our steps are guarded. This invites us to live with more confidence and less fear. Think about the peace this brings, knowing that with every step you take, you're not alone. Where in your life do you need this protection the most? Beyond visible interventions, there's a protection that is silent and constant. Maybe we don't see angels with our eyes, but the promise of their presence is real. Just like the prophet Elisha, who saw the heavenly army surrounding his house when enemies came against him, we need spiritual eyes to recognize this divine company. How can this truth transform the way you face your daily challenges? And the great revelation here is that this protection isn't reserved just for critical moments, but in all our ways. God doesn't abandon us in any circumstance. How does that change the way you face tomorrow? Knowing that angels are around you brings a new perspective, a renewed faith, and a confidence that comes straight from God's throne. Verse 13 of Psalm 91 brings a powerful image. You will tread upon the lion and the cobra, you will trample the great lion and the serpent. These creatures symbolize the forces of evil, dangerous and cunning, but the psalmist reminds us that in God, we have the authority to face them. This verse isn't just about protection, but about active power, the ability to step on things that, without God, would destroy us. Have you ever thought that, in Christ, we have this same authority to face the spiritual enemies in our lives? Treading on the lion and the cobra represents overcoming spiritual enemies and challenges that often seem insurmountable. Jesus mentioned this same concept when he said he would give us power to trample on snakes and scorpions, Luke 10 verse 19. It reminds us that despite the spiritual attacks we face, God gives us the strength and courage to come out victorious. And this isn't something distant, but a reality available to those who trust in Him. Have you experienced this spiritual power in your life? The Bible is filled with examples of people who, with God's help, overcame powerful enemies. Think of David, who, as a young shepherd, defeated the giant Goliath. To the world, he didn't stand a chance. But David knew that with God, he could face any adversary. That same confidence is available to us. God gives us the power to step on the snakes and lions in our lives, whether they're problems, temptations, or spiritual attacks. This verse reminds us that we're not alone in our battles. God's power is available to those who seek Him. Often, we face situations that make us feel small, vulnerable, and incapable. But God equips us with a strength that goes beyond our own. He gives us not just protection, but authority. What are you facing today that seems too big for you? Remember, with God, you have the power to step over any adversary. The big revelation here is that this power doesn't come from us, it comes from God. He gives us the strength to overcome evil and face spiritual challenges head-on. This changes the way we live, not with fear or retreat, but with courage and authority. Are we ready to use the authority God has given us? That's the key to living a victorious life, even in the midst of struggles. In verses 14 to 16 of Psalm 91, God makes a powerful promise: protection, long life, and salvation for those who love Him. It's a conclusion that brings comfort and hope, reminding us that no matter what we face, the Lord is faithful to those who trust in Him. This promise makes us reflect: what does it really mean to love God and trust Him with all our hearts? When we place ourselves under His protection, He responds with care and deliverance. The promise of long life isn't just about living many years, but about a life full of meaning and purpose. God doesn't call us to just exist, but to live an abundant life filled with His presence and purpose. Think of characters like Noah, who lived many years because he walked with God and fulfilled his divine calling. Have you ever wondered what God's calling is for your life, and how this promise can come true for you? God not only promises to protect us, but also to deliver us in times of trouble. He assures us that He will answer when we call on Him. That's an incredible promise. The Creator of the universe leans down to listen and respond to us. Daniel's story in the lion's den is a clear example of this. He trusted God, and God delivered him from certain death. How does this apply to your life today? When you call out, God is ready to act. In addition, God promises us salvation. This isn't just a future salvation, but a daily protection, a deliverance we experience as we walk with Him. It's like David, who was saved countless times by trusting in the Lord, from his battles with Goliath to his escape from Saul. What does it mean for you to know that God not only delivers you but also guarantees your salvation in every aspect of life? Finally, the big revelation in these verses is the assurance that God is always present for those who love Him. He protects us, answers us, and gives us a life full of purpose. The question is, are we living according to this promise? Are we fully trusting in God, knowing that He is faithful to fulfill every word? This is the hope that Psalm 91 leaves us, a promise of protection and salvation for all who choose to love and trust in Him. Now that we've explored the power and depth of Psalm 91 together, think about the protection and promise that God offers us every day. If this message touched your heart, if you found renewed hope and faith, I invite you to join us on this journey. Like this video, share this powerful word, and let us know in the comments how God has been your refuge. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any inspiring Bible stories that change lives. Let's walk this path together, living out these divine promises and impacting the world with God's Word.